A March 31st trial date has been set for Nick Civella and Peter Tamburello, the reputed underworld leader, and his cousin charged with attempting to bribe a federal prison official down in Texas. Both Civella and Tamburello have already pleaded innocent of the charges. At an omnibus hearing held today, defense attorneys indicated they would be filing motions challenging the legality of searches and electronic surveillance conducted by the government, and also charging misconduct on the part of prosecutors because of publicity surrounding the indictments. All defense attorneys will be reviewing the 400 hours of tapes from the bugs and wiretaps used in the federal strike force investigation. And because of the amount of evidence, Civella's attorneys indicating to us tonight they would seek a delay of the March 31st jury trial.
Berwyn police tonight are investigating the death of a 67-year-old Cicero man. The man's body was found in his Berwyn restaurant. Don Harris has a report.
Leo Manfredi's body was found in the basement of his restaurant at 6233 Roosevelt Road. There was a large gash in his head, and since there is not enough room to stand up in the basement, there was a theory he might have cracked his head on a beam. Now the medical examiner's office says he was shot. One of the last persons to see him alive was the owner of the barber shop next door. So some of his friends came over Thursday and couldn't find him?
Yeah, right.
They came looking for you?
No, they didn't come looking for me. They just asked me, have you seen Leo? And I said, yeah, he's in the store as far as I know. His car's outside. That was it.
They didn't get in?
No, the door was locked.
And his daughter came?
No, his daughter came the following morning and asked me if I had seen Leo, and just like I just told you, I had seen him in the morning. Other than that, that was the last time I saw him. So she decided to call the police to get in there, just in case something was wrong.
There was no sign of forced entry. The restaurant had been closed for 3 months. For WGN News, this is Don Harris.
A drug raid on a South Side apartment building today netted Chicago police 15 suspects and a half-pound of heroin valued at $1 million. Police say one of the suspects, 65-year-old Chuck Ashley, is one of the most efficient, their words, drug dealers on the South Side. The raid took place at a building Ashley owns at Maryland Avenue and East 65th Street. Police say they're looking for 6 suspects.
Chicago police also staged 2 early morning raids on alleged gambling operations. Officers went to 3242 South Prairie Avenue to investigate a shooting, but they found 18 people reportedly involved in an illegal card game. All 18 were arrested on gambling charges. That game was allegedly run by a former Chicago policeman. The other raid broke up what investigators call a high-stakes dice game. John Drummond reports.
Scene of the gambling raid was a vacant storefront at 2625 West 63rd Street on the city's southwest side. Police had to batter down the front door to gain entry, and when they got inside, investigators said they found 16 men standing around a dice table. The raiders confiscated a police radio monitor, apparently used by the gamblers to keep tabs on police calls in the district. Also seized was more than $5,000 in cash, some dice, and other gambling paraphernalia. A vice detective told WBBM Radio's Joe Cummings that he thought the game was an outfit operation.
What do you base it on?
The amount of the stakes, the type of operation as to the moving from one location to the other, and other information that we've developed.
Charged with being the keeper of a gambling house was 54-year-old John Manzella of 6231 South Keating, who is described by authorities as having crime syndicate connections. The other 15 men were charged with being patrons of a gambling house. Reportedly, the vacant storefront on West 63rd Street was one of several locations used by the gamblers for a dice game. Sources said on some nights, the action would be in a building on Damon Avenue, while on other evenings, the floating dice game would move to sites on 63rd Street. John Drummond, Channel 2 News.
President-elect Reagan will spend this week in California, and members of his transition team say there will be no more cabinet appointments until at least Wednesday. But there was some controversy today about a transition team official. He's a Teamster vice president from Cleveland who's been named to Reagan's Economic Affairs Group. Charles Gibson has details.
They announced it with a press release this morning. Jackie Presser, a Teamsters vice president, to be a senior advisor to the Economic Affairs Group of the Reagan transition. And as shown by the transition's own chart, that means Presser will be an advisor in the transition at the Labor Department. Problem is, Presser, for more than 2 years, has been a named defendant in a civil suit brought by Labor, charging the Teamsters Central State Pension Fund with a breach of fiduciary trust, charged with making tens of millions of dollars in questionable loans to Las Vegas establishments and underworld figures. As a result of that suit, Presser was forced to resign as a trustee of the Teamsters Fund. Presser himself has reputed underworld connections. In a San Francisco trial this year, this man, James the Weasel Fratiano, said that in a conversation, Presser, quote, told me himself that I don't do nothing unless Blackie tells me. Fratiano did not name Blackie except to say he was the boss of Cleveland's La Cosa Nostra, the Mafia. Presser has denied Mafia connections. And indeed, Presser, who made $270,000 as the 15th vice president of the Teamsters last year, has never been convicted of a crime. But what is his reputation?
There's been a history of investigations, of sometimes murders, of criminal activity, which it certainly seems that there's a pattern that Presser is heavily involved in it.
Transition officials say Presser will serve only as an advisor to the Economic Affairs Group as a sounding board for ideas about labor, adding he won't actually set foot in the Labor Department. You must understand, said one spokesman, he comes from the Teamsters, the first union that endorsed us. Charles Gibson, ABC News, Washington.
For the second time, a possible witness in the probe of Labor Secretary Raymond Donovan has been murdered gangland style. And Leon Silverman, the special prosecutor who's seeking to determine if Donovan is linked to organized crime, has called the FBI in to investigate. 31-year-old Nathan Maselli was found shot in the back late last night in his car near Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. His father, William Maselli, is in prison, an alleged member of the Genovese crime family. He's co-owner of a firm that's being investigated for selling the city $500,000 worth of landfill dirt it may have already owned.
You can always count on the Civic Federation to come up with a grand idea for saving money. Reduce the payroll, it says, by making some cuts in personnel. Sure, it's easy enough to say, but what it means is making some cuts in politics, getting into those offices at City Hall, into the books and the records of the city council, into the ins and outs of the personal business of the alderman, like the Alderman Roti, for instance. That's Fred Roti of the 1st Ward. Making some cuts in personnel could mean cutting off the branches of the Fred Roti tree. His daughter, Rosemary, $26,000 a year in the mayor's office. And his son-in-law, Ronald, $34,000 a year at O'Hare. His daughter, Mary Ann, $24,000 a year in the Department of Housing. His son-in-law, John, $32,000 a year in the Department of Police. His daughter-in-law, Anna Marie, $16,000 a year in the Department of Health. Those are the children on the Fred Roti tree of the city payroll. Now, what's the alderman supposed to do? Cut off those children? Lose all that money from the Fred Roti tree of the city payroll? How about the rest of the branches of the Fred Roti tree? The nephew, Frank, $17,000 a year in streets and sand. Another nephew, Frank, $22,000 a year in streets and sand. Another nephew, Frank, $23,000 a year in the purchasing department. Another nephew, Frank, $24,000 a year in streets and sand. And there is nephew Peter, $22,000 a year in streets and sand. And another nephew, Peter, at $22,000 a year in streets and sand. And also on the Fred Roti tree of the city payroll, there is the niece, Sherry, at $10,000 a year on the Building and Zoning Commission. And the niece, Mary Ann, $13,000 a year in the Department of Public Works. And the niece, Annette, at $20,000 a year in the Department of Health. And the cousin, Salvatore, $22,000 a year in streets and sand. And the cousin, Victor, $24,000 a year in streets and sand. And don't forget Fred himself on the Fred Roti tree of the city payroll, $26,000 a year in the city council. Add up all that money on the Fred Roti tree, and you get $377,000 a year in the city budget for the relatives of a city alderman. And it's not just any alderman, mind you, but the alderman of the 1st Ward, which is the muscle ward of the big bucks and the big vote. And the Civic Federation says to make some cuts in personnel, which is a nice way to say cut off some branches of the alderman's tree. Well, the Civic Federation may know a lot about city finances. It doesn't know beans about city politics.
Cincinnati manager Pete Rose, the subject of a painful season-long inquiry into his alleged illegal betting, the visit to New York is especially difficult. Frank Courier explains.
Tonight, Pete Rose and his Reds will try to stretch their winning streak to 2 against New York. the city where the Cincinnati manager is said to have feared for his safety because he hadn't paid his gambling debts to the mob. Major League Baseball is investigating this possible underworld connection. Allegations Rose bet heavily with this man, Richard Troy, nicknamed Val, who ran bets out of his house in Staten Island. Troy has been indicted for gambling and is linked to New York organized crime.
We always said that the investigation was ongoing, but I've never commented on it, and I'm not going to start now.
It's not the only time Rose's bets and debts have been tied to the crime syndicate. In a partnership with New York promoter Mike Bertolini, Rose turned autographed balls and baseball cards into cash at huge exhibitions and allegedly used the profits to settle debts with bookies. Bertolini won't comment on the allegations, but in a phone call secretly taped by Rose accuser Paul Jensen, he talks about Rose's decision to ignore more than $200,000 in debts.
The bookies in New York, how much did he...
talk like that on the phone. I hate
All right.
that.
What are they going to do to him?
I don't know. We're not going to worry about them.
Oh, my God, Mikey. You're going to have some people after him.
In his deposition to Baseball, Rose told investigators, quote, "They threatened to burn down my house, to break my kids' legs if I didn't pay up." Threats that come as no surprise to organized crime experts.
If you're a gambler and you run up large debts, the people to whom you owe the money, and ultimately they're organized crime figures, they're going to look to get paid.
With a renewed focus on links to the underworld and Rose's lawsuit against the baseball commissioner, the legal maneuvering on both sides threatens to postpone any verdict on his fate for weeks. For Pete Rose, who insists he never bet on baseball, every day of delay buys another day in the dugout. Frank Courier, CBS News, New York.
Don Bolles was an investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic in Phoenix. He's dead now, and there is evidence that he was killed because his reporting took him too close to a story someone didn't want him to print. Today in Phoenix, 2 men were sentenced for his murder. Kim Sedgwick has the story.
Bolles was critically injured a year and a half ago when a bomb ripped apart his car in the parking lot of a downtown Phoenix hotel. He died 11 days later. Jimmy Robinson, a plumber, and Max Dunlap, a contractor, were convicted in November of first-degree murder and conspiracy. They were sentenced to death today. Judge Howard Thompson ruled the murder was done for money in a cruel and depraved manner, and he found no circumstances sufficient to call for leniency. Both defendants insisted they were innocent, calling the 3-month trial a sham and a fraud. Afterwards, they talked to reporters about the death sentence and the prospect of going to the gas chamber.
We were expecting it. There hasn't been anything, as far as I'm concerned, fair in any part of the trial, so I was basically prepared for what he came forth with.
That it doesn't hold any fear for me, because I just cannot relate to that actually happening to an innocent person.
The defense attorneys say they will ask to have the sentence set aside and will request a new trial because of newly discovered evidence. In Arizona, appeal is automatic after a death sentence, and that may take several years. Kim Sedgwick for NBC News, Phoenix.